What's up everybody, welcome back. So after a week of vacation, it's time to start making videos again, and we're gonna start with kind of a special one. So this is a re-upload of part number 30, and if you're here coming from part 29 and you think, what is this project? Well, it's actually the multiplayer project, but this is part 88, so it looks a little bit different than yours. But don't worry, you are watching the correct video. So there's two parts for this video. I'm gonna upload part 30A and part 30B. 30A is for people coming from part 29. They haven't added any spectator stuff yet. They are going to start from scratch, and they are also going to do everything that was in the old part 30 video. So for them, it's like nothing ever happened. They won't notice the difference. And for the people that are already further down in the series, they have the spectator in, but it's actually not working properly and they want to fix it. For those people, I'll be uploading part 30B. So make sure you watch the correct video and then everything should be fine. With all of that stuff out of the way, let's just dive in and fix this spectator. Or make it, depending on which video you're watching. So this part of the video is for people that are already further down in the series and added a spectator previously and found out it's broken and they want to fix it. So this part of the video is for those people. Not if you're coming from part 29 and you're going to continue the tutorial and you want to do part 30. You want to go to the beginning of the video and actually do that part. This is for people later in the series that come back here to fix their spectator. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go into our character and open our hero base, and we're gonna set up a few components first. So let's go to the viewport, why not? In here, first of all, we have our spring arm and camera attached to our capsule component, and that's not ideal. So what we want to do over here is drag it onto the mesh. And that's not really important for the in-game camera, but it is going to be important for the spectating camera. So make sure that we add the new spring arm that we're going to add now to the mesh and not to the capsule component. So select the mesh, add a new spring arm. So this is my spring arm spectate. And for the spring arm, we want to make sure that we set the component replication. So component replicates, we're going to enable that over here. And then we want to make sure it matches our original spring arm. So over here we have -40, 198, and then a target arm length of 250. So let's go to our new spring arm. -40, 198, and then a target length of 250. We also need to rotate it 90 degrees, so that's the rotation over here. And that's matching our original spring arm, and then we want to attach a camera target to our new spring arm. So make sure you have the spring arm spectate selected. We're going to add a child actor. Over here, there we go, a child actor. And we actually need to add an actor because we can only use actors as a view target. We cannot use a component as a view target. So as a little workaround, we're going to add the child actor. We're going to select it over here. The child actor class is going to be our camera view target that we are using in the lobby. So this is actually just an empty blueprint with only an arrow in it so we can see where it's at, and we're going to use that. So attach that one to the spring arm spectate and make sure you reset all of the location and rotation. And then double check if you have any rotation on the original camera. So I have it set to -8 on pitch. So we want to go to the child actor and also set the correct rotation over here. So now we have a duplicate of our spring arm with a camera target attached to it. And we also want to make sure that we select the child actor camera target and enable the component replicates over here. So that's the setup that we want to do for our components. And by the way, if you have the switching shoulder setup added, where you can switch the camera from the left shoulder to the right shoulder, we need to make sure that we update the transforms, because right now we attached it to our mesh and it was previously attached to our capsule component. So the relative locations over here changed. So if we go to our event graph, and let's make sure we keep this in mind. So we have -40, 198. If we go to the event graph, we want to take a look at our input action switch shoulder. So we could probably just look for it, switch shoulder, search, thank you. Oh, come on, man, what the freak are you doing? What? Dude, I'm not even sure what's happening right now. Okay, thank you. So we have input action switch shoulder, and if we go to the right over here, we have the default right shoulder and left shoulder location. And as you can see, it doesn't match up with what we currently have. So we want to make sure that we set the correct offsets. And this is actually our right shoulder. So for the right shoulder, we want to set it to -40, 198. And now my event graph is gone. Come on, man. Oh, you're not even going to open it if I double click there. That's fine. Then I'm going to go over here. What the actual... Oh, come on. Ah, fine. Okay, so we want to go to our switch shoulder. What the freak? I'll be back in a sec. Okay, thanks for your patience. I'm not sure, but Unreal just freaked out. So our right shoulder location over here, that's going to be default -40 and then 0 on the pitch and then 198. It's not pitch because it's not rotation. So -40, 0, 198, and then for the left shoulder it's going to be 40 and then 0 and 198. So that's to make sure the switching shoulder doesn't break. Let's compile and save it, and that's good to go. So we can go inside of our player controller, and that's actually where we want to do most of our work. So let me grab my notes in here as well, and we're going to go to our framework shooter player controller. And let's dive into the event graph first. So we want to look for our spectate after that event. So let's make sure we go over here. And currently we have that set to replicate run on server, and we're going to change that. So we want to set it to non-replicated. And in the meantime, I am switching my notes as well, so bear with me. So over here, we're going to set the reliability. I'm turning it off before and then set it to non-replicated. So that's probably some little quirk of mine that you don't need to do. But if you don't turn it off and turn it back on, you will see the boolean is actually still ticked. So that's that event. And then we also want to grab the boolean for is spectating, and we're also going to set this one to non-replicated. And then we have a setter for is spectating in here that we want to remove, and that's inside of our respawn after that event. So let's look for respawn after that. Over here, is spectating false. We want to get rid of this one, so let's simply delete it and hook this back up to what it used to be. Then we have a show spectator controls event, and we also want to change the replication on that one. So let's make sure that we go over there. So this is a bit tedious. Show spectator controls over here. Executes run on owning client. So again, I'm going to disable reliability and then set it to non-replicated. And then we need to create a few new events. So let's start doing that. That's a bit easier than messing with existing stuff. So we have spectator update targets. Get rid of this. And we're actually going to create that event. So create a new event and call this spectator update targets. And we need a few variables for this. So we want to create those right away. Let's create a new variable, all spectator targets. And this is going to be an array of hero base characters. So look for hero base, turn it into an array. Then we also want one for our current spectator target. So current spectator target. That's a single hero base, so not an array. And we also need an index, so it's a little bit easier to keep track of what we're actually spectating. So we're going to set our spectator target index. That's fine. And that's going to be an integer, like so. So now we can grab our spectator targets over here and we can clear the array. So we can start fresh. And then we want to do something that it kind of depends on how far in the video you are. So if you already have a current game mode enumeration in here, then you can drag the enum in here and you can switch on it. So depending on what type of game mode you're playing, you might want to determine if you are able to spectate or not. And if you don't have this boolean in yet, then it's not really a big deal. You can simply leave this out because you only have 1 or 2 game modes at that point, so it's not really that important. So let's hook this one up. And what we want to do, let's see, so we want to be able to spectate in Endless Wave, Free for All, and possibly the survival game mode, but that kind of depends on what we're going to do with it. And for Team Deathmatch, we want to change it up a little bit because we need to change the way that we select targets. So if you don't have the different game modes, then you can start setting up the branch that I'm going to make right now, and don't worry about anything else. So let's hook this up to the Endless Wave and we can get all actors of class. We want to get all of the hero base characters in the level. And we can start looping through them. So let's hook up an for each loop. So we're going to make sure this is actually a valid player that we can spectate. So first of all, let's grab an isValid node just to make sure it's not on the verge of being deleted. Then we're going to drag off here and we're going to get our isAlive boolean. So get isAlive, that's also on the hero base character, and simply plug it into a branch over here. And if that's good, then we can simply add it to our all spectator targets array. So let's drag in a getter and add an item to it. So hook that one up to the true pin and then plug in the array element. So we have all of the targets stored in the array. And then after the for each loop is done, we're going to check if we have a current target assigned or not. So we're going to grab in our current target and do an isValid check. And if we have a target assigned, we might want to update the index because the order of the array might have changed after the update. So then we're going to grab the all spectator targets array, drag off here and find an item. We're going to find our spectator target and the result is going to be our current spectator target index. So that's for the isValid pin and plug in the result of the find node. And if we don't have a valid spectator target, we're simply going to set this to -1. So that's good to go. And now we want to go to the switch on game modes and we can hook up our free for all pin as well and possibly the survival pin depending on if you want to be able to spectate in here or not. And as I mentioned, for Team Deathmatch, we want to handle things a little bit differently, but not too different. So we can kind of copy this stuff over here and let's paste it down here. So we're going to hook this up to the team deathmatch branch. And what we want to do extra in here is check the team ID of the player, so we can only spectate players that are inside of our own team. So let's drag off the array element, and from here we can get the team ID of the spectator target. We're going to compare this and simply compare it to our own team ID that's inside of our variables. And if that returns true, then we can add this player to our array of targets. Like so. So that should be good, and then we can simply do the same thing over here, so that's fine. Yeah, that should be good. So now we want to go back to the event graph and mess up some events in there. So let's get back to the event graph. Previously we did a lot of stuff for the spectating on the server side, and I decided that's not really needed because you can't really cheat by spectating anyway, so I don't really care if a player wants to spectate or not. So we're gonna do a lot more on the client side, but there's one downside. To get a name of a player that we're spectating, we need to have the server do it for us, because the server is the only one that has access to all of the player controllers. So if we are a client, we don't have access to player controllers of other clients, so that's why it's hard for us to get a name directly. So we need to make sure that we have an event that the server can grab the name from the player that we're spectating and then tell the name back to us. So we're going to create a custom event and call this server get spectator player name. And we're going to run this on the server. So replication run on server. And we need to put in our spectator target as input. So spectator target. And that's our hero base variable. Come on, what the freak are you doing, man? It's being really annoying. Deselecting stuff, moving to graphs by itself, I don't know. But we're gonna try and plow through it. So we have the spectator target. We can drag off here and get the shooter player controller. From the shooter player controller, we can get the player profile. And that should actually be the player profile. There we go. So we can break the profile, and in here we have the name. So we can drag off here and call our update HUD spectator player name. So that's a function we already had in here from the previous setup that we're gonna reuse. So we can simply plug it in like this. And this will make sure that the server gets the correct name and passes it back on to the client. So that's good to go as well. Then we want to create one last function in here to actually start spectating. So let's do that right away. And that's going to be spectator start spectate target. So spectator start spectate target. And first of all, we're going to give this one input, so we can cycle up and down through our array of targets. So let's call this previous and make it a boolean. First, we're going to check if we actually have more than one entry inside of the array or not. If not, we don't need to worry about cycling through the array. So we're going to grab our all spectator targets array, drag off here and get the length. And we want to make sure that the length is greater than 1. So drag off here, greater than, turn this into 1 and plug it into the condition. So if that condition is false, we're going to set it in a local variable for now. So let's add a local variable, local new index, drag it in here. So if this is false, we're going to set the index to 0. Then we want to check if we want to cycle up or down through the array. So we're going to grab a second branch and plug in our previous boolean. So if this is if this is true, we're going to cycle down. If this is false, we're going to cycle up. So if we want to cycle down, we need to know if we're not already at the lowest index. So we're going to grab a branch in here, grab our spectator target index, and simply check if this is not 0. So is equal to 0, plug it in. If that's true, we need to set it to the last index in the array. So then we can grab a setter for the spectator target, plug it into the true pin, grab our array of all spectator targets, and from here we want to get the last index and plug it in. So that's going to be the new index. And if this is false, then we can simply subtract one of our current index. So grab the spectator target index, subtract 1, and store it in the local index. And we also want to store the other one in a local index, by the way. So over here, we're not going to set the spectator target index immediately. We're going to set it in the local index first. So that's good to go. Then if we want to cycle the other way through the array, so up, then we're also going to grab a branch, and we need to make sure we're not already at the last index. So we can grab our spectator target index is equal to, and over here we can simply hook up our all spectator targets last index. So that's the condition. If this is true, we need to start at the beginning of the array again. So we can start at 0, and we're not going to use the normal one, but we're going to use our local variable. So if this is true, we're going to set it to 0, and if this is false, then we actually want to set it to the current index plus 1. So we can grab our spectator target index and simply add 1 to it, and hook it up as well. Okay, so now we can grab a setter for the spectator target index, and we're going to hook up all 5 of the branches over here. Like so, and we're going to set it to our local variable, so the local new index. And then we want to double check that this is actually a valid target. So that we don't need to run this on tick, for example, but we're going to keep this a little bit more less intensive, and that's why we want to add an extra is valid check to make sure that if we select the target, it's still actually in game. So we're going to get an is valid node. No, we're going to grab all of our spectator targets, and we're going to get a copy. We want to get a copy of our spectator target index, and from there we want to check if this is valid. So if the hero base character is actually valid. If not, we're going to grab the spectator target index, plug it not valid, and then set it to -1. And we also want to grab our current spectator target over here and set it back to an empty reference, so there's nothing in here. And if this is actually valid, we want to set our current spectator target to the result of the get node over here. So plug that one in over here. And then from our spectator target, so that's our hero base character, we can get the spectator view target. So that's the actual child blueprint that we added, and I might have not renamed it in this version, so let's double check in the hero base character. So it's actually still called child actor, so that's why I couldn't find my spectator target. So over here I'm going to rename it spectator target. So again, that's the child blueprint that we added. Then we can compile and save, and now I should be able to find it over here. So if we drag off the current spectator target, we can get the spectator target. So that's the actual component that should be all the way down in the list, get spectator target. So as I mentioned, this is the component, and we need to get the actual child actor that we added to it. So we want to drag off here and get the child actor. And with this actor, we can plug it into a set view target with blend node. So we're going to drag off here, set view target with blend. Okay. There we go. And this is our new view target. So we can plug in the child actor and you can mess around with the blend time. So I'm going to make it pretty quick. So half a second and it will jump to the next character pretty smoothly. Okay, that should be good. Over here we can return. And that's actually the biggest part of the spectating function. So previously we created a new pawn specially for it and attached that to the player and things like that. So this is also a bit less intensive. So it's not only working, but it's also better. So that's nice. So that's the event start spectate target. We have that one in place. We want to make sure that we have some input events in place as well. So let's go to an empty spot on the event graph and we need to add the inputs for the next player, the previous player, and for respawning. And what I'm gonna do for now is simply use the keyboard over here. So keyboard Q. And then also keyboard E. That should be over here. And then keyboard R. So if you want to do this truly properly, you want to create an input action for each one of these. Add the input action to your mapping context and then get that enhanced input action over here. So I'm gonna do it a little bit faster because this video is already very long and I want to get this out of the way. So we want to make sure that we select all three of these nodes and we don't want to consume input. So we want to turn this one off over here. Then we want to grab a branch, plug it in over here. And first we're going to check if we are spectating or not. So let's grab our is spectating boolean. And if we are, then we can continue. First, we want to update our spectator targets. So we can drag in a call to our function. And then we want to start spectating the target. So we can drag that one in as well. So Q is for spectating the previous target. So we're going to enable the bool over here. And after we did that, we want to check if we have actually retrieved a valid spectator target. So this doesn't necessarily need to return a valid target. It might end up not returning a target at all. So in here, first we're going to do is valid. And if this is actually valid, we want the server to get the name for us so we can display it on our widget. So from here we can drag off and call our server get spectator player name and pass on our spectator target like so. So that's Q, and for E we want to do the same thing, so we can copy and paste it, but in this case we want to disable the bool, so we're going to cycle the other way through the array. Make sure we also hook it up to the isValid node to update the spectator player name, and that's good to go. For respawning, we want to make sure that we check if we're spectating also, so let's grab a branch over here first, plug it in. And it kind of depends on how far in the video you are or not. If you want to add a second check in here, that actually determines if you can respawn. So if you look in your variables and you have a boolean called is respawn enabled, then you want to drag that in over here and hook it up with an end node like so, and then plug it back into the branch. If you don't have the bool, simply leave it out and only plug in is spectating. Then we want to grab a setter for spectating. So at this point we're respawning. So we're going to set the is spectating back to false. Oh, sorry, we're setting it back to false. We want to clear some of the variables. So we're going to get our spectator targets array and we're going to clear it. We don't need it anymore. We are also going to clear our current spectator target. So simply drag in an empty setter, and then we want to set the spectator target index over here to -1. So that's not valid anymore either. And after we did all of that, we can call our respawn after that event that's already present on the controller. So that's good to go as well. There is one thing I want to do in here, and that's add the input action for pausing a game. Currently we have the pause game on our hero base character, but the way we're going to do it is this time we're actually going to unpossess our hero base character, and we didn't do that in the previous setup. And because we don't have the character possessed anymore, it obviously will not register our input events. So if we want to be able to access our menu and not even necessarily pause it, because we can't in multiplayer, but we want to maybe go to the menu and quit the game, we can't because we don't have that input event on our, well, we have it on the character, but we're not possessing that character anymore. So we're going to get our input action pause game in here. Enhanced input action pause game, the event, not the value. So this one. And the first thing we are going to do in here is get the game instance. We want to cast it to our shooter game instance and hook it up to the started pin, not to the triggered pin, because that will keep firing as long as you have the button pressed. And on the game instance we have a toggle pause event, so toggle pause game. And this will return a bool if the game is actually paused or not. So we're going to plug in a branch over here. And if the game is paused, we might want to hide our HUD. So we're going to grab a second branch. We're going to grab our in-game HUD, drag off here and do an isValid check. So this time I'm going to grab the green one. I can simply plug that into a branch. And I'm going to drag off the HUD again and look for isInViewport. So if it's actually visible, then we're going to hide it. So we're going to grab an end node and make this our condition. And if that's true, we're going to grab our in-game HUD and set the visibility to hidden, like so. And that's good to go as well. Okay, now we want to go to our spectate after that event. So I need to switch my nodes as well, otherwise this is going to mess up. Let me see, spectate after that. And we want to change that up quite a bit, to be honest. Oh, really. Let's look for it. Spectate after that. Over here. So let's go to an empty spot and just set this up entirely from scratch. That's probably a little bit easier. One thing I'm going to do is add a keyboard input in here, so it's a bit easier to test. So I'm simply going to say keyboard 0 and plug that in here as well. So we're going to run this on the local player controller, so we can simply test with a button press if our spectating is working. We're going to set is spectating to true, that's fine. Then we don't need our shooter game mode and the call to the function, so we can delete that. First, we want to grab a has authority node. So as I mentioned, we're going to unpossess our pawn and the server needs to unpossess it. So if we are a client, because we're local, we can be either a client or the server. If we're a client, we need to make sure the server does it. So if we are authority, we can simply unpossess ourselves. And if we are a client, we need to create a custom event. Call this server unpossess. This event needs to run on server, and then in that event we're simply going to call unpossess. So this is going to be called by the remote client, server unpossess. But now we run into a tiny little issue because these are different instances and we kind of need to wait for the server to be done unpossessing before we continue over here. And the way we're going to do that is by using a bool and the event on unpossessed. So what we can do is right click and look for event on unpossessed. So this will fire on the server as soon as the server unpossesses a pawn. And then in here we can add a tiny delay. It doesn't really have to be much, just 1 or 2 ticks to make sure this is actually being processed on the server side. And then we're going to grab a replicated boolean and set that to true to tell that client that the unpossessing is done. So we're going to grab a bool and call this something like trigger on unpossessed. So turn it into a bool and then make sure it's replicated. So in here, we're going to set the bool to true. And then over here, we're going to wait for the boolean to actually be true. So we're going to grab a branch, plug in both of the execution pins, plug in our new boolean, trigger on unpossessed. And if this is false, we're going to delay until next tick. So we're going to simply wait until the server is done over here. And if the server is done, then we can call our spectate update targets event. So let's grab that one first. After that, first we want to show our spectator controls. So let's call that one first. Show spectator controls. Then we want to update the targets. And then we can start spectating. So call those 3 events in a row over here. After that, we can have the server update the name for us. So if we go to the input events, never mind. We can simply grab our current spectator target and check if that's valid. So is valid. Plug it in over here. And if we have a valid spectator target, we want the server to retrieve the name for us. So over here we want to call server get spectator player name, plug in our spectator target over here, and after that we want to make sure that we reset our boolean that we created as the trigger, and for that we need to be the server again. So we're going to grab a second has authority branch over here. If we are the server, we can simply grab our trigger on unpossessed and set it back to false over here, so it's ready for use next time. And if we are a client, we need to have the server do it for us. So we're going to create a custom event, server reset trigger. So this needs to replicate on the server. In here, we're going to set the boolean back to false. And then over here, we're going to have the client call it, so server reset trigger. And that should be good as well. Okay, so we're getting closer. We might want to do some cleanup with the old spectating stuff that we have in here. And there's a bunch of it in begin, play, and tick. So let's start with multicast begin, play. That's over here. So multicast begin play, we have a branch checking if we are the local controller, and if this is false, we are disabling tick, because on tick we're actually doing some spectator related stuff, and we don't want the not local controller to also execute that if it doesn't need to. Long story short, we're going to get rid of this because we're going to get rid of all of the stuff that we're doing on tick as well. So for the false branch, you can simply delete it. That's fine. Then we're going to continue a little bit more. And over here we have the is spectating branch. So we can actually get rid of that one as well. We don't need to do anything in begin play if we are spectating. So let's disconnect it over here. Add mapping context. And then we're going to continue to remove all widgets. And all the stuff that was over here, we can simply delete it. So we're getting our current spectator pawn and storing that. We don't need it anymore. Get rid of it. So we actually cleaned up our event begin play a little bit. Let's straighten it out. There we go. And then we also want to go to our event tick. And we can simply get rid of it. So let me see, over here we're setting the control rotation from the player that we're spectating, and we're doing that in another way because we're using the view target right now. So the entire event tick, we can simply delete it and that's good to go. Now we should also be able to delete our spectator pawn in here. Maybe. It kind of depends on if it's in another blueprint or not. So let me double check. No, we're still using it, so let's wait a little bit. We need to clean up the game mode first probably, and then we can delete it. So for now we are done inside of the shooter player controller, and we're gonna do a few small adjustments in a widget and hero base character, and then we are pretty much good to go. So first of all, let's do the player died widget. So let's go to our widgets folder and open our widget blueprint player died menu over here. In the graph, we actually have a reference to our spectator pawn. So in the button respawn, we want to get rid of this reference. So we can simply delete it and hook the pin back up over here. So that's still working. And then we probably want to go inside of our event construct. And over here, we just want to make sure that we hide and show the correct borders because we're currently not doing that. So let's make a little bit of room over here. And I'm going to grab the border default buttons, the border pop-up are you sure, and the border spectator controls. And by default, we want to make sure that the default buttons are visible. So we're going to set the visibility over here. Default buttons visible, and the other two should be hidden if we open our spectator menu. So let's make sure that we have those set up in case we open it a second time and things are not on the default variables anymore. There we go. So that's the player died menu. Then we want to go inside of our shooter game mode. So let's get this out of the way, go to the framework folder and open our shooter game mode. So on the event graph, we actually have the spawn spectator after that event. And we want to get rid of that one. Respawn after dying. We should have that on here, right? Or am I just completely crazy? Let me double check my notes quickly. Spawn spectator after dying. Okay, so I might have actually deleted that. Oh, freaking really, I'm looking at the functions, not the events. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. So, event graph, spawn spectator after dying. We're simply going to get rid of this event. Let's delete it. And then depending on how far you are in the series, you want to go to our game mode endless wave player died function. And in here, we're also casting to our spectator pawn in case the cast to our hero base failed. So we're going to get rid of the cast over here. And that's good to go as well. So compile and save that one. And the last thing we need to do is make some changes in our hero base character. So let's open that one. Characters, hero base. In here, we added the pause game input event to our player controller. So in here, we can delete it. Otherwise, we have a duplicate and that's not necessary, obviously. So let's look for our input action pause game. Oh, this is getting way too big of a blueprint. And we're simply going to get rid of it inside of our character. So we want to keep the one in the player controller, delete the one in the hero base character. After that, we can do some additional setup. So this is not really required, but it kind of depends on how you want the spectator to work. So if I go to my event tick over here, what we could do is simply set the rotation of our spectator spring arm to the new aim rotation of the character that we're spectating. If we are doing that, we will follow the actual view of the player that we're spectating. If we don't do this, then we'll be able to look around ourselves. So depending on what you want, you can add this or not. So what I'm going to do is simply grab my spring arm spectate over here and set the relative rotation, not location, but rotation. Plug it in and simply set it to the new aim rotation over here. And also do the same thing for the server replicated event. So on there, you also want to plug in, okay, smooth, the set relative rotation, like so. So this doesn't really hurt. We're not actually adding a replicated variable or anything. We're just adding the call to this component. So it's not producing any extra replication. So that's not a reason not to do it. It just depends on how you want the spectating to work. So that's good to go. One final thing you might want to do is go to the actual spring arm component for spectating. And in here, by the way, what's pretty important, we need to disable inherit pitch, yaw, and roll. So this is something you need to do, otherwise it won't function like you would expect to. And something that's optional in here is enable camera lag and camera rotation lag. So especially if you have very high latency games where you have a very high ping, this will be the last final smoothing of the movement. So depending on what you want, you can enable it and play around with the variables over here. It's not really required, but it does make it look that tiny little bit smoother. So play around with it, do whatever you like. Okay, so I think we should actually be good to go. And hopefully I didn't really mess anything up, because I've been recording for quite a long time and it was getting a little bit messy. So let's just hit play and see what happens. So we actually have a 2-player game in here. That's good. So I added a little key binding for me to actually check if it's working. So I don't need to actually die or anything. We can just test this pretty easily. So I'm going to go to the free-for-all mode. The only downside, if we test it with the key press that we added, the player died menu will not be valid, because we haven't died yet before we started spectating. But for the actual spectating, that should work fine. And by the way, this is free for all, so I can just kill the other player and then everything should work as intended. So what we're going to do, we're going to kill the host. And he should be able to spectate me after a couple of seconds that I have set as the respawn delay. And I think I might have set it at 10 seconds. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this is already messed up and we need to look at it. So this is not actually a bug, because officially we don't have respawning enabled. We don't have spectating enabled in free for all, so that's why the button is not here. So this is not a bug, it's just something I forgot. But if I hit 0 on my keyboard, I should spectate the other player. And that's actually not working either, so that's fucking great. Okay, so I'm gonna check out what's wrong and I'll be back in a sec. Okay, it's not too bad. It's not actually really broken. It kind of makes sense. The host was trying to spectate its own player, so that's why it looked like nothing happened. In a normal game that wouldn't happen, so right now I'm pressing the spectate button when my character is alive, and normally we would have unpossessed our character before we call any of the spectating functions. So normally we would not be able to spectate our own pawn because it's simply not there anymore. So if I hit 0 on my keyboard, you will see I spectate. If it doesn't spectate the player immediately, you can hit Q or E to cycle to the next or the previous player, and then it should go and spectate the correct player. So that's why it looked like it wasn't working, but it is actually working, and it does kind of make sense if you think about it. So now the host is spectating the client, and as you can see, the rotation and stuff like that is actually matching. So the only little, well, quote unquote downside is the camera lag that I added on the right side. You can see the character move from left to right a little bit, so that's because of the camera lag and the camera rotation lag. So play around with the settings for that, or just completely disable it, depending on what you want. Other than that, it's really smooth and it's actually working as intended. And I can also hit R on my keyboard and then I should respawn. So that's working as well. Although we don't have the widget on screen, all of that stuff is actually working. And the host can spectate the other way around as well. So we should be good to go. I hope you enjoyed the video. It's not something I do often, revisit a previous video, but this was really broken and needed to be fixed, so I'm glad we got it out of the way. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Bye bye.